But I want to talk about Glasgow University first. They've made what they might consider, and others as well, a bold move to pay back slave trade profits. Now, they've agreed to raise and spend £20 million in reparations after discovering it benefited the university by millions of pounds from the slave trade. It's believed to be the first institution in the UK to implement such a programme of restorative justice, as it is known. So the money will be raised and spent over the next 20 years on setting up and running the Glasgow Caribbean Centre for Developmental Research. That sounds like a winning idea. It'll be managed in partnership with the University of the West Indies. The centre will be co-located in Glasgow, and the Caribbean will sponsor research work and raise awareness of the history of slavery and its impact around the world. Now, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, who's Vice-Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, he said the university's decision was a bold, moral and historic step in recognising the slavery aspect of its past. I'd like to talk about this with you. Dr. Tom Thorpe is a historian of conflict, and we welcome him to the programme. And Claire Hucan is with us as well. She blogs as Sister Outrider, and the central focus of her work is Black feminist theory, activism and writing, and she is co-author of What is Race? Good morning to both. Claire, if I could start with you first and ask you, how does one work out how much damage has been done by the slave trade nowadays? I mean, how does one put, if you like, a value to how does one know which step to take first? Good morning.
Good morning. I think the slave trade generated of the scale human suffering. It's just one of the worst evils that's ever been committed in humanity's history. I'm not sure there is a way to put an exact scale on that. However, I think the centre has potential to produce some very interesting research and ideas, but I'm not entirely convinced it can be framed as restorative justice. For example, Glasgow University could have paid generations of full scholarships for African and Caribbean international students if they wanted to make reparations via education, or given the money straight to the University of the West Indies to spend as they see fit. Ultimately, that 20 million is being channeled back into Glasgow University, which doesn't, to me, suggest reparations.
Okay, well, difficult to know then if this is not the right approach. Where does one begin and end with matters like this? I mean, you've already talked about it being one of the worst episodes in human history. I think that's universally accepted. But the bombing of Dresden, wasn't great either. And nor was perhaps Hiroshima, nor was the Roman invasion, nor was, I'm not going to go on, but you see the point. It's a difficult area. Do we need to know more about this area? Do we need more understanding? Isn't that understanding already present, and has it not been acknowledged?
Well, there's a slavery museum in Liverpool which does absolutely fantastic work raising public consciousness. And while it's not a cure-all for racism in society, it does encourage people to actively engage with these histories. But in Scotland, there's a weird kind of double consciousness. Jackie Kay, our poet Makar, she absolutely nailed it when she pointed out that Scottish people like to believe they are fairer and more progressive than England, while often failing to account for the racism Black people face here in this country. Scottish exceptionalism kind of gets in the way of unpacking that colonial legacy and fully engaging with racism in Scotland, which is a natural product of Scotland's past.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll come back to you in a second. Dr. Tom Thorpe, at Glasgow University doing the right thing. Good morning.
Well, you say they are to be commended for their focus on trying to uncover the past, but I think as Claire has pointed out, a lot of this is about money they might raise sometime in the future, which will ultimately benefit them. And while it's to be commended that we look at these really complex and difficult issues and we actually, bring them out from the depths of our history and actually put Britain's role as a centre of the slave trade during the 18th and 19th century, and actually, put forward that there are some very unpleasant aspects to our history, and we like to forget about these darker dimensions of what we've done in the past, especially when politicians cherry pick history. We need to face up to these.
How many times are we going to apologise for this? I'm white. Do I have to feel guilty?
No, I don't think it's about feeling guilt or, taking the burdens of the sins of our fathers upon us and flagellating ourselves in public to prove how wonderful our halos are. It's about actually facing up to history and looking at history in its broad sense, not just saying that it's all appallingly ghastly and evil, but understanding the individuals as a product of their system in time. It doesn't just mean we have to accept them and like what they did, but we need to see why they did it and actually see them as individuals rather than sort of Hollywood villains of being ghastly and horrible and they've done not nasty things. Yes, they did, but we need to put them in their context and understand what happened and the true extent of it. And it's always more complex and nuanced than people like to think.
Yes, I'm sure. I mean, are we to be ashamed of the grand Victorian architecture that was the outward sign of the wealth and prosperity that we see? Are we to take down Clare? Are we to take down statues to people who gave vast sums of money, which were probably generated on the backs and through the blood of others? Are we to take down those statues? I mean, where do we logically finish?
I think taking down the statues in a way erases that history, but perhaps they could be. Perhaps there could be an addition of plaques outlining the history that these people were complicit in.
Yes,
but Britain's NHS, our education system, our infrastructure, even our welfare state were all made possible by money injected into the British economy through profits from the slave trade.
We know that, though. See, that's the thing. How long are we going to keep on apologising for? And being
that money still positively benefits Britain today.
Okay, well, what do you want us to do about that?
Pay reparations.
Who to?
To descendants of people that were enslaved and sold by British people.
Yeah. Well, what about if you're going to go down this road of paying reparations, and you have I think a really logical and strong case for that, if you could find how many people, by the way, how many people in Britain would we be paying reparations to?
How many people in Britain?
How many people?
I don't know. But I think
if you're going to say we need to pay reparations, is it going to be £5 or is it going to be £5,000 or £100,000? Are we going to look at each individual case and work out how much money they are owed by some formula?
I don't ultimately know. I don't claim to have all the answers, but I think institutions like Glasgow University definitely have the research capacity and resources to track down the descendants. I don't think it's impossible.
So you have no idea how much or who to, but you think it's the right thing to do?
I do, yes.
Even though you've got absolutely not a clue how to begin the process even?
Well, I've just said I think universities would be a good way of tracking people down. I'm not sure ultimately what the exact sum paid out should be, but I do think there should be something because there is lasting intergenerational poverty in countries across the global south as a consequence of the transatlantic slave trade.
Okay. Is slavery taught in school, Dr. Tom Thorpe?
I think slavery is taught as part of the curriculum, as far as I see, but obviously that would vary across the United Kingdom in terms of where we are. But I think the important thing is to actually raise it in the public dimension. We think we know history, but often we don't. We don't know the complexities and the nuances of history and how slavery has indeed benefited the economy in a positive way, and how much of our industrial revolution was based on this, and how we think we're the great country that abolished slavery in 1807 in the United Kingdom in 1830.
I don't think that's taught or understood actually by any generation that I've been associated with, and I'm 55 and I've had children who are in their 20s. I don't think that that's a common perception.
Maybe not. I mean, it's a long time since I was at school, but I think there are schools which do a lot of really good work. And again, going to the museum in Liverpool, as Claire said, which is absolutely fantastic, and really does put it in a very positive context, and actually explains the legacy of how many of the social and political issues that arise out of slavery are perpetuated through society. So, understanding how it is complex and how it is much more sophisticated than people just think, appeasing the liberal consciences of Guardian readers. It's always a much more nuanced historical phenomenon and needs to be placed within that context.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Tom Thorpe, for getting the discussion going.